It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when my world tilted off its axis. I was seated at the long mahogany table in the district conference room, the kind of sterile space where dreams of public improvement went to die in the face of budget constraints and regulatory red tape. We were waist-deep in quarterly numbers, allocations for water treatment upgrades, some debate over transit subsidies, and my mind had just started wandering toward lunch when my phone vibrated. The screen flashed. Unknown. Number. I ignored it. Another buzz. Same number. Again, I silenced it. Then, just as I was about to refocus, it buzzed again, this time with my wife's name. I excused myself with a tight smile, muttering something about a family matter, and stepped into the hallway. The moment I picked up, I knew something was wrong. There was panic in her voice, but worse than that, there was fear, raw, undiluted fear that reached through the phone and clutched my chest. "Rafiq," she whispered, almost breathless. "It's Amani. She's in the hospital. Her arm is broken." My breath left me. "What happened?" I asked, forcing myself to stay calm. "There was an incident at school. She fell, but it wasn't an accident." That sentence dropped like a bomb. I didn't hear the rest clearly. Words blurred together. Something about a woman, something about the playground, something about a garden. But one name echoed louder than the rest. Mrs. Harriet Crenshaw. My jaw clenched so hard I felt my teeth grind. Harriet, the unholy queen of our HOA. A woman who took her neighborhood authority more seriously than actual elected officials. She had made herself judge, jury, and executioner of every violation within our gated community. Whether it was the shade of paint on your garage door or a child's bicycle left outside for 5 minutes, Harriet had an opinion. Usually, one that came stapled to a fine, but this time she had crossed a line. Amani, my daughter, just 5 years old, gentle, sensitive, the kind of girl who cried if she saw someone kill a spider. And now she was in a hospital bed with a broken arm because some bitter old woman decided her self-importance outweighed basic human decency. I ended the call and left the office without a word. The driver barely kept up as I stormed out of the building, heart pounding in my ears. The hospital was only 15 minutes away, but every red light felt like an insult. I kept replaying the possibilities in my head. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe Harriet just shoved past and Amani lost her balance. Maybe. But then again, I knew Harriet. When I finally reached the pediatric ward, I found my wife sitting beside a small bed, her eyes red-rimmed and her hand wrapped tightly around Amani's tiny fingers. Amani lay there in a blue gown, her little arm cast in white plaster, resting on a soft pillow. She looked so small, smaller than usual, and so tired. The painkillers had dulled her awareness, but when I leaned over her and whispered her name, she opened her eyes slightly and tried to smile. "Hi, Baba," she murmured. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kissed her forehead. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now." After making sure she was resting, I turned to my wife. She had pulled herself together, but just barely. "She came to the school," she said, voice low and tight. "Harriet. She said the new garden violates HOA bylaws because it's too close to the perimeter fence. Can you believe that? A preschool garden. Where was staff?" They tried to stop her. She pushed through. The kids were at recess. Amani was climbing the jungle. "Jim, my fists balled. She just walked through them like they weren't even there," my wife continued, trembling now. "And she bumped into Amani hard enough to knock her off. Witnesses said she didn't even look back. Didn't check if she was okay." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My rage was silent, volcanic, bubbling underneath every breath. "She thinks you're just some neighborhood dad," my wife added bitterly. "She doesn't know." "Ah, yes, that part." Harriet knew my name? Barely. Rafiq from the blue house with the untrimmed hedges, she once called me at a meeting. She had no idea I was Rafiq Khan, Deputy Commissioner of District South, overseeing everything from infrastructure development to school oversight. A name that carried weight, that opened doors and shut others down permanently. And now she'd hurt my child. I left the hospital after making sure Amani had everything she needed. My wife stayed behind to keep her company, but I couldn't. I couldn't sit there, useless, while the woman responsible went on with her day as if nothing had happened. Back in the car, I called the school principal. I introduced myself, and her voice immediately shifted from exhaustion to attention. "We're aware of what happened," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Crenshaw entered without clearance. It was chaotic. But we've initiated an internal report. I need the security footage," I said flatly. "I understand. I'll have it sent within the hour." An hour later, in the privacy of my home office, I watched the footage. It showed everything I feared. Harriet storming onto campus like she owned it, ignoring a teacher's attempts to intercept her, brushing past kids, then the fateful moment. Amani was climbing down from the playset, smiling, mid-laugh. Harriet shoved past two kids, didn't even pause. Her shoulder clipped Amani. My daughter lost her grip, tumbled down, landed hard. She lay there crying in pain as Harriet walked on without turning around. A teacher ran to her only after the scream. I watched it 3 times. Then I downloaded the footage. Then I opened my case files, the ones where citizens had submitted complaints about HOA harassment. I typed in Harriet's name. 6 matches, 6. Parking tickets issued outside of HOA jurisdiction. Property inspections done without consent. Threatening letters. Even one instance where she reported a neighbor's dog to animal control just to get back at them for hosting a party. How had no one stopped her? Because people didn't want to fight back. They were scared. They were tired. She was relentless. But I wasn't scared, and I wasn't tired. I was angry. And now, she had my full attention. She didn't know I had power, influence, the law behind me. To her, I was just a guy who didn't edge his lawn to her specifications. She had no idea who she had messed with. I leaned back in my chair. The footage paused on the exact moment Harriet walked past my injured daughter without blinking. "Oh, you're going to learn today," I whispered. And this time, she wasn't just facing an angry parent. She was about to face the full force of a father, who also happened to be the deputy commissioner. I sat alone in my car outside the hospital, the engine off, but my blood still boiling hot. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long orange shadows across the empty parking lot. My hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. My phone lay face down on the passenger seat. Somewhere upstairs, my daughter slept with a broken arm, because a woman drunk on her own authority had shoved her aside like she was just another obstacle in her crusade for neighborhood perfection. I wasn't just angry. I was surgical, focused. A part of me had detached entirely, cold and calculating, sifting through what needed to happen next. Years of administrative service had trained me to keep a calm head under pressure, to evaluate, risk, and move strategically. But this wasn't strategy. This was retribution. I started at the school. The principal, Mrs. Siddiqui, greeted me with a nervous energy. She was young, clearly overworked, and visibly rattled by the storm Harriet Crenshaw had left behind. "We've already initiated an incident report," she said quickly, ushering me into her office. "We've alerted the district, and we're consulting with legal." "I need a copy of the surveillance footage," I said, calm and direct. She blinked. "Are you with law enforcement?" "No," I replied, holding out my badge. "I'm with the district government, Deputy Commissioner Khan. My daughter is the child Mrs. Crenshaw knocked off the playset." Her face went pale. Within minutes, I had the footage in my inbox. "You should know," she added, lowering her voice. "There's pressure on us to downplay this. The school board, well, Harriet has friends, deep pockets. She's been a donor for years." I nodded slowly. I expected as much. Thank you for your honesty. Back in my home office, I watched the video again, this time not as a father, but as an investigator. I studied Harriet's gait, her dismissive body language, the aggressive manner in which she cut across the play area. There was no attempt to slow down, no hesitation. She had barged through a group of preschoolers as if they were weeds in her front yard. It wasn't just negligent, it was entitled. The kind of entitlement that thrives in unchecked power. I replayed the scene where Amani fell. Her scream was silent on camera, but I could hear it in my mind, could feel it in my bones. The child who asked to bring ants home in a jar to protect. Them, now lying in a hospital bed because of a woman who valued hedges more than human life. I needed more. I opened my desktop terminal and logged into the district grievance archive, a restricted internal system I had access to. Every registered complaint in the district went here. I typed in Crenshaw Harriet and hit enter. 6 results. Complaint 1. Illegal property inspection. Resident claimed Mrs. Crenshaw entered their yard without consent to take pictures of ER. Fence violations. Case dropped. Complaint 2. Verbal harassment. An elderly widow reported being threatened with fines for leaving her trash can out past 8 a.m. She claimed Harriet shouted on her porch in front of neighbors. Case unresolved. Complaint 3. False reporting to animal control. Neighbor accused of neglect because their dog barked during the day. No evidence found. Case dismissed. Complaint 4. Disruption of peace. Teenager fined for playing guitar on his balcony. No HOA. Rule cited. Parents paid the fine to avoid further harassment. Complaint 5. Unauthorized vehicle towing. A father's car was towed from his own driveway after a parking stripe was repainted, without informing residents. Case pending. Complaint 6. Suspicious contact with child services. A family reported Harriet after she allegedly called CPS when their kids played outside barefoot. CPS found no concerns. A pattern formed. Not a woman enforcing rules, but one weaponizing them, twisting bylaws into personal vendettas, petty infractions exaggerated into crises. Parents silenced, through fear. People complied not because they believed in her leadership, but because resisting meant constant war. I started reaching out to the victims. I called the widow Mrs. Mira. She remembered every detail. She screamed at me in front of my grandchildren, she said. Said I was lowering property values with my old habits. I cried for days. Another call, the family whose car was towed. They had footage too, Harriet instructing the tow truck herself, clipboard in hand, smirking like a queen dishing out justice. Then the family she reported to CPS. They had since moved out of town. I was scared she'd take our kids, the mother told me over the phone. We never even spoke to her, but she watched us like a hawk, like we were criminals. I compiled everything, footage, testimonials, copies of the fines she issued, notes she'd left taped to doors, passive-aggressive threats scrawled in cursive. Your hedge violates Section 2.3. Failure to trim will result in fines and potential HOA action. Even the tone reeked of condescension. It was enough. More than enough, but I wanted more. I pulled up the HOA's budget filings. The reports were public, but shallow. Expenses were vaguely categorized. Beautification, community development, security enhancements. The numbers didn't add up. The garden she stormed into that morning was reportedly funded with a PKR 1.2 million allocation, but the principal had told me it cost barely PKR 300,000. Where did the rest go? I traced. Payments from the HOA's ledger. Some were deposited into accounts linked to Crenshaw Landscaping Services, a shell company. I confirmed it with the SECP database. The company's only registered employee was Harriet's cousin. I laughed bitterly. She wasn't just a tyrant, she was corrupt. I returned to my notes, carefully categorizing each offense. I drafted an internal report to the District Oversight Committee. Attached evidence, timelines, footage, signatures, witnesses. I even added a formal recommendation for immediate audit of the Golden Meadows HOA, with a separate file for criminal liability under child endangerment laws. As I stared at the final document, something in me shifted. This wasn't just about Amani anymore. Harriet had created a kingdom of fear, a neighborhood empire where children were silenced, elders were humiliated, and decent families were driven out of their homes, all under the guise of community standards, all protected by technicalities and cowardice. Well, no more. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Hello? This is Rafiq Khan," I said calmly. A pause. "Oh, from Spruce Street, right? The man with the—" "Deputy Commissioner Rafiq Khan," I interrupted. "You hurt my daughter today, and you're going to answer for it." Another silence. Then she scoffed. "Excuse me? Are you threatening me?" "No," I said, my voice cold. "I'm promising you. There's a difference." She hung up. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. The game had changed. She just didn't know it yet. The next day, I would call an emergency HOA meeting, not as a father seeking justice, but as the man who held the keys to every door she thought would stay closed. Harriet Crenshaw's reign was about to collapse. The morning of the emergency HOA meeting was unusually quiet, like the eye of a storm. Clouds loomed heavy over the Golden Meadows neighborhood, casting a dull, gray sheen over the perfectly manicured lawns and painfully symmetrical flower beds that Harriet Crenshaw insisted on inspecting every week. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my jacket, not for appearance, but for symbolism. Today I wasn't just a father seeking accountability. I was the deputy commissioner executing justice. And this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a reckoning. I arrived at the community hall 15 minutes early. The HOA board members were already gathering, clustered together near the refreshment table like ants around sugar. They looked curious, mildly anxious. There hadn't been an emergency HOA meeting in years, and never one called by someone who wasn't even on the board. But I had the authority to summon it. My title was stamped in bold on the letter I'd sent out the night before. That alone had stirred the hive. At exactly 6 p.m., the room filled. Every folding chair was occupied, and the noise of casual chatter bounced off the high ceiling. Then came the door creak, slow, deliberate, theatrical. Harriet Crenshaw entered, right on cue. She wore her signature red scarf like a sash of command, her lips curled in a smirk that had silenced countless neighbors over the years. Her presence was exactly what I had expected. Smug, self-assured, unaware that her empire was about to implode. "Deputy Commissioner," she said with mock surprise, her voice carrying over the crowd. "I was told this meeting was about a community emergency. Are you finally fixing that awful drainage issue at the east entrance?" Laughter sprinkled the crowd. She was trying to maintain control through charm. A politician in pearls. I stepped up to the podium, unshaken. "Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me beyond the Blue House and the hedge violation, I'm Rafiq Khan, Deputy Commissioner for District South." The room quieted instantly. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Harriet's smile faltered. "Just slightly?" "I'm here tonight," I continued, "because one of you, Harriet Crenshaw, seriously injured my 5-year-old daughter 2 days ago." The silence was instant and absolute. I let it linger. "She entered a preschool without clearance," I said slowly, letting the words hang. "She disrupted recess, stormed through a group of children, and in the process, shoved my daughter off a playset, breaking her arm. She did not stop. She did not apologize. She walked away like it never happened." Gasps. Audible ones. I reached into my bag and held up a manila folder. Inside this folder is a security video showing everything I just said, along with signed witness statements, medical documentation, and confirmation from the school administration that Harriet had no permission to be on the premises. Harriet stood up, her cheeks flushed. "This is absurd," she snapped. "I was conducting a routine inspection of the perimeter garden. It's part of the HOA budget." "That school," I said, locking eyes with her, "is not under HOA jurisdiction. That garden was a community gift, approved by the district and maintained by school staff. Your presence there was unauthorized, and your behavior, documented and corroborated, was reckless." The murmuring returned, louder this time, more pointed. Neighbors leaned in to whisper, brows furrowed, eyes flicking toward Harriet with a new wariness. "But this meeting isn't just about what you did to my daughter," I continued. "It's about the pattern of abuse that you've inflicted on this neighborhood for years." I handed the stack of folders to a volunteer who began distributing them row by row. "Inside," I announced, "you'll find formal complaints, filed with the district, 6 of them, plus copies of HOA fines issued without proper citation, unauthorized inspections, towing of vehicles, threats made in writing, and most importantly, evidence of misappropriation of HOA funds." Harriet laughed, a short, brittle sound. "This is political theater. You're grandstanding because you're angry." "I am angry," I said evenly. "But what I brought tonight is not emotion. It's evidence." I opened the slide presentation behind me and clicked to the first image, a scanned copy of an invoice from Crenshaw Landscaping Services, totaling nearly PKR 600,000 for garden maintenance. The recipient? A cousin of Harriet's. The vendor's SECP registration, dated only a week before the first payment. Another slide. A screenshot from a security camera, time-stamped, showing Harriet directing a tow truck operator to remove a car from a driveway that, according to neighborhood maps, was entirely on private property. Slide 3. A scanned CPS complaint form submitted anonymously against a neighbor, one who had reported Harriet to the board only 2 days earlier. The room was still silent, but the energy had shifted. From confusion to disgust, from uncertainty to anger. I could feel it ripple across the room like heat. I stepped away from the podium and looked directly at Harriet. "You've hidden behind bylaws and technicalities. You've bullied, fined, and trespassed under the illusion of authority. But the HOA doesn't make you a law enforcement officer. It doesn't place you above common decency, and it certainly doesn't protect you from consequences." She tried to speak again, but I raised my hand, firm. "This is not your floor anymore." I turned back to the audience. "As Deputy Commissioner, I've initiated a formal investigation into Golden Meadows HOA. An audit is already underway. We are freezing all discretionary funds until the results are reviewed, and effective immediately, I am recommending the removal of Harriet Crenshaw as HOA President, pending board approval." Applause. It started with a few hesitant claps, then grew, a surge of sound that filled the hall. People stood, mothers who had once stayed silent, fathers who'd just paid the fines to keep peace, elderly neighbors who'd been mocked or ignored. They stood in solidarity, not just for Amani, but for all the little tyrannies they had endured. Harriet's face crumpled, but her pride wouldn't let her sit down. She turned and stormed out of the room, her scarf fluttering behind her like a red flag surrendering to the wind. The board convened a vote on the spot. The motion passed unanimously. As I packed my files, several neighbors approached me. One man, shaking my hand, said, "I've lived here 15 years. That's the first time I felt safe in an HOA meeting." A woman added, "We all knew something was wrong, but no one knew how to stop her. Until now." I nodded, grateful, but my mind was already elsewhere. On Amani, on her tiny cast, on the way her voice trembled when she told me she was afraid to go back to school. This wasn't over, but it was the beginning of the end. As I stepped out into the night, the rain began to fall lightly, quiet, steady, cleansing. Harriet Crenshaw's empire had cracked, and I would make sure it never rose again. It's strange how quickly a neighborhood can change when fear is lifted. 1 week after the HOA meeting, it felt like Golden Meadows was shedding a skin it had worn for far too long. Lawns looked brighter, people walked slower. Eyes met instead of avoiding. For the first time since we'd moved in, the place felt like a neighborhood, not a dictatorship with flower beds. It began with the school. Principal Siddiqui, now empowered by public support and a wave of media attention, filed a formal complaint with the education department. She didn't water it down. The report detailed Harriet's unauthorized intrusion onto school grounds, the reckless endangerment of children, and her known history of community harassment. Amani's case became the trigger, but not the only evidence. Other parents came forward. Quiet at first, but bolder with each voice added. One mother revealed that Harriet once accused her son of vandalism just because he had chalk on his hands after art class. Another father said Harriet demanded the preschool remove a mural because she thought the colors were too aggressive. The education department launched an internal investigation. Then came the police. With the security footage, medical records, and testimony in hand, the district police opened an inquiry into possible charges: trespassing, child endangerment, and civil liability. I didn't need to intervene. The evidence spoke for itself. Harriet's power had always come from silence, from people fearing the noise of resistance. But now the silence was broken. A CPS officer reached out quietly to offer support. Not because we had filed anything, but because Harriet had apparently been flagged before for suspiciously frequent anonymous reports. That entire file, names, addresses, claims, was re-examined. What began as a community incident slowly expanded into a full review of Harriet's conduct over the past 5 years. Then, the HOA audit was completed. The accounting firm hired by the district uncovered more than just unethical behavior. It found criminal negligence. Budget allocations had been manipulated. Fines were issued without legal basis and collected in ways that never showed up on ledger sheets. At least 3 vendor contracts, landscaping, pest control, and fencing, were awarded to businesses, run by Harriet's relatives or close friends, without proper bidding or approval. The homeowners had been funding her little empire, and no one had noticed because fear had replaced oversight. The board, newly freed from her influence, voted to dissolve the current structure and reestablish a transparent, rotating leadership model. Monthly meetings were open to public comment. Budgets were digitized and posted online. The very bylaws she had once weaponized were rewritten, rebalanced, and democratized. But Harriet? She didn't go quietly. For a few days, she pretended it was all a misunderstanding. She showed up at meetings, stood outside the school, even tried to hand-deliver letters of apology to residents. But it wasn't guilt. It was desperation. The walls were closing in. Then the summons came, not just civil, but criminal, trespassing, public endangerment, misuse of HOA funds. The charges weren't enough to jail her long-term, but they were enough to destroy the illusion of control she had cloaked herself in for years. When the community finally banned her from holding any position within the HOA and the school board barred her from school grounds for life, she left. Just like that, the red scarf was gone. The clipboard, the sneer. She moved out in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no fanfare. Just a moving truck, a few broken rose bushes, and the quiet collapse of a self-made tyrant. I watched from my window, not with joy, but with relief. Not vengeance. Closure. As the neighborhood stitched itself back together, so did our family. Amani, brave as ever, came home from the hospital with a cast covered in doodles and glitter. Her classmates had drawn hearts, flowers, and one rather impressive Pikachu on the plaster. She wore it like a badge of honor, but the emotional bruises lingered. She cried the first time we drove past the school again, clutched my hand too tightly when we visited for her reintroduction meeting, slept with the lights on for 2 weeks, but we held her through every step. We got her a therapist, enrolled her in a gentle martial arts class, not to make her fight, but to show her she wasn't powerless. She was hesitant at first, but when she earned her first white belt stripe, the look in her eyes said everything. Power wasn't about control. It was about choice. I spent more time at home, not as the deputy commissioner, but as a father. We built her a new swing set together, stronger, taller, safer. She picked the paint, purple with glitter, every screw tightened by my hand. One afternoon, I sat on the porch watching her swing under the golden afternoon light. Laughter bubbled from her lips like it had never left. My wife came out, coffee in hand, and sat beside me. For a long moment, we just watched. Then she said quietly, "I think this place might finally be safe." I nodded. "Because they finally know who they're messing with." She smiled, half amused. "No, because you reminded them they had a voice. And maybe that was the truth. Harriet didn't fall because I was the deputy commissioner. She fell because people finally spoke, finally refused to bow. My job just gave them a path. The real power came from them, from the mothers who stood together, the fathers who shared their stories, the teachers who chose truth over politics, and the neighbors who stopped being afraid. Golden Meadows was still recovering, but the scars were fading. The kids played in the streets again. Gardens bloomed wild and colorful. The new HOA put up a mural wall in the park, a collage of handprints from every child in the neighborhood. Amani's handprint was front and center, purple, glittery, strong. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it looked like a swing set, or a child laughing again, or a house without hate mail taped to the door. Harriet was gone. But our neighborhood, it had come back to life. And my daughter, she was smiling again. If you were moved by this true tale of HOA abuse, community strength, and a father's quiet war for justice, don't forget to subscribe to the HOA Stories on YouTube. We share the most shocking, dramatic, and outrageous real-life neighborhood conflicts and how they were resolved. Have a story of your own? Drop it in the comments below. We just might feature you next.